England Take. I'm your host, AJ Kierstead, NewEnglandTake.com. To more from the show, I am over here at the State House today. Just did an interview with Edmond Laplante, the Constitution Party of New Hampshire. He has received all the signatures he needs in order to be on the ballot in November. Very exciting stuff. But we'll be throwing him first in the show. Later on, we're going to talk a little bit about the Diary of a CEO podcast. Had Konstantin Kisin and David Keene, who's an economist and professor. Very interesting and mask-off moments that I highly suggest you tune in for the second half. But this is the New England Take. Be sure to check out NewEnglandTake.com. It is a Substack and a great way to support the program. You can get every episode in your inbox. Big thank you to WKXL. Every Saturday, 8:30 a.m. picks up the program. And a huge supporter of what they've got going on over there in Concord and Manchester. Also, thank you to the GraniteGrock.com. Every Friday shares out the show. And Concord TV also picks up the program. So first up here, we're going to be throwing into now U.S. Senate candidate Edmond Laplante. Signatures are filed and talk about what that process was like, because it is very interesting to see what the independent candidates have to go through with the Senate side, because you need 3,000 certified signatures that are approved, and that's a huge hurdle for these third-party candidates that aren't on the Republican or the Democratic ticket. So very informative. I hope lawmakers especially pay attention to this journey he had to do, because it does have a huge impact in order to have diversity of opinions on the ballot, going beyond just the two parties. So if you're a lawmaker, please pay attention to this. Maybe there's some reform so we can kind of synergize what's going on across our 200-something towns in the state of New Hampshire. And in general, it's just great to see a candidate that I've been following the last several months here get the signatures, get them filed, and maybe he's got a chance here, and I'm sincerely interested to see what happens. All right, third to Edmond Laplante. All right, here with Edmond Laplante, who is today filing. So we're recording this Thursday, the 27th, and you're about to be heading upstairs to the Secretary of State's office. Constitution Party of New Hampshire, you're going to be officially filing as a U.S. Senate candidate. I can only imagine there was chaos of everything needed for this, especially as a third-party candidate. What does that look like for people that don't know what that process is?
For a third-party candidate for U.S. Senate, you have to get 1,500 signatures per district. So, of course, here in New Hampshire, we have two districts, CD1 and CD2. 1,500 for each. So, in my case, for U.S. Senate, 3,000 certified signatures. Now, these signatures have to be certified.
Yeah.
So we collected almost 7,000, but because of the election purge, where they have the new rules that went into place, more than half of them were no good. And a lot of these people don't realize that when they come time to vote, they may not be able to.
Yeah, because they need to be registered to vote in order to fill out one of these.
Yep. And then I had to bring them to, so in New Hampshire we have 230 plus towns. I had to bring each individual one to their town halls. They had to be certified. Each one has a deadline. Our deadline to drop them off was August 2nd. So we had to have all these 7,000 signatures into all the town halls by the 2nd. Then in turn, they had till the 26th of August to get them back to me. Mail, whatever. And in a lot of cases, I was like, you know what, we got to drive and pick them up. So we had people going all around picking them up. And like I said, out of the 7,000 signatures, we ended up with probably 4,000 that were good. And a lot of it had to do with the voter purge, they've been calling it. And
that's important to note for especially we're trying to make sure, it's important we have integrity in our elections and everything of that nature. But if we want to make sure that everyone is able to run, especially for outside the two major parties, this is a tremendous roadblock that needs to be considered. And in the equation of the best path forward, this should be definitely considered.
Yeah. Another issue I had brought up to one of our reps, he said, well, you know, the town halls sent out notices to these people that you have. Yep, fair enough. Mm-hmm. I'm sure they did, and a lot of people ignored them or whatever. And he said, well, they'll be able to vote. When they come to vote, all they have to do is get a birth certificate and, a bill. However, here's my case. When they get out of work at 5 p.m. and you go to vote, you get there at 6 o'clock, it closes at 7. Oh, you need to go get your birth certificate. Then what? You don't have time. And my other point was, okay, so if that's the case and they do have their birth certificate, then they can be certified then, what about when they sign my paper?
Yeah.
Does that count or no?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they didn't have it. He goes, well, at the time they weren't. I'm like, yeah, but you just said that they weren't being denied, but yet here's their voice saying, and the endorsement papers that I get, nomination papers, they're not an endorsement. It's not a, I'm endorsing you. It's not a, I'm voting for you. It's let the guy talk. I want to hear what he has to say. Basically, that's how that works.
So how did the individual towns, as you're dealing with that, were they receptive? Were they helpful? What was that like?
Yes, a lot of them had no idea. They'd never seen it before.
Yeah.
Because what happens is a lot of, like when I talk to different groups that have done this before, like the Libertarians, they told me focus on Nashua, Concord, Manchester, just the big cities.
Yeah.
And I was like, nah. Yeah. I want to hit everybody because I want to hear what everybody has to say. And that saved my bacon, to be honest with you. Because what I found was, like Nashua, we had 500 nomination papers signed there. Half of them were bad. Concord, like a third of them were bad. Manchester, half of them were bad. And if I hadn't have gone to all these little towns and just did what everybody else told me to do, we wouldn't have made it.
Wow.
Our towns, the little towns, Richmond, I had that's where I'm from. I had 95 signatures, 93 of them were good. And that seemed to mirror all across the little towns. We had 90% better success rate at the little towns.
Interesting. It's, yeah, I mean, looking forward to our state house, they're going to be busy here in the coming years. Is there something you think they should be considering when it comes to things of this nature?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a lot of people were bringing up, you know, it shouldn't be so hard. I kind of, at first I'm like, oh my God, you know, 7,000, that's ridiculous. However, it gave me an advantage because when the Democrats talk to the Democrats, they talk to just the Democrats.
Right.
And the Republicans the same way, which, hey, that's fine. Yeah. I don't blame you.
It's a game.
But I got to hear everybody.
Yeah.
Both sides. And especially in New Hampshire, 40% are undeclared or they're not happy or just don't vote. I got to hear them. I mean, them guys don't get to talk to them. So they have no idea what they're ticked off about. Yeah. You know, half of them, like for Donald Trump, for example, half people love them, half people hate him. That was just on the Republican side. Democrats mostly, oh no, don't get me wrong.
That's a little different equation.
That's a little different there, but you know, and that's what I found. It gave me a good insight of, you know, hey, what are you guys feeling? You know, and I always ask, you know, what would you do if you were running? What would you try to fix? And I listen. And I see a lot of the other candidates who are trying to get signatures like me, they argue. I don't want to argue. I asked them a question. And in my eyes, even if it was a Democrat or whatever, I didn't argue with them. I'm like, you know what? I never thought of it that way. There's no need for me to argue just because we disagree. Yeah. I'm like, you know what? I never thought of it that way. I don't agree with it. But hey, you know what? That's cool. Now I know where you're coming from. It gives you different perspective.
It's very much a New Hampshire thing. I see this I've been covering the First in the Nation primary since 2008 when I was a student journalist all the way up through. And it was funny. I ran into, it was the Memorial Day parade here in Concord. And Paige Boschman, who's running for as a candidate, running against Goodlander for the 2nd Congressional District. And people are just like, oh, wow, what you got going on? They're like curious. They want to know. And the people like yourself and Paige give her credit. The people who have that back and forth are the only ones that have a chance in New Hampshire, honestly.
Sure. Yep. Well, sure. And I talked to Paige. I went up to her and, you know, I told her, hey, listen, you know, I'd love to hear what you got to say. And she did. We had a really good conversation. A lot of people were telling me, oh, she's unreasonable. She wasn't. I mean, I sat down with her probably because I didn't bump heads with her. I listened to what she had to say because I care. Yeah. You know, I was like, okay, to me, hey, it's a different perspective. What do you see? Oh, you know what? I never thought of it that way. Cool. So if I understand where she's coming from, I can see, you know, she has a point, or something's not.
So, Constitution Party in New Hampshire, you're running for U.S. Senate here. What's your platform? What are we looking at here?
Well, my top 3 things is it constitutional? Any bill or resolution, any law. Number 1 thing, is it constitutional? Second, how does it affect the voters? Does it affect their liberties, their privileges, the pocketbook? Third, transparency. I know they said a lot. In my travels, I came across 3 gentlemen created a thing called Civic Chain, where you'd be able to see where your money's going, your taxpayer money, saying in live time, and say, hey, it wasn't supposed to go there, and you could say, hey, no, or hey, you made a mistake, you didn't carry the 4. Hey, thanks for pointing that out. You just saved the town $1 million. Awesome. And that's what I think. I think that's a really big thing. Transparent. People talked about that.
All right. So anyone that wants to follow you, you the nature of the third party, you are going to be on the main ballot here in November.
Yes.
So if people want to learn more about Constitution Party and your campaign, where should they go?
Laplante for Constitutional NH. That's for the number. Laplante for Constitutional NH. Or Facebook, Edmond Laplante. You can hook me up there, and we'll be looking for you. It's the name of our movement. We're calling it the Constitution Revolution, because I think both sides are ignoring the Constitution, and that's the one thing that should bind everybody.
100%. Love it. All right, I'll put a link in the description for anyone checking us out on YouTube or the podcast services. Best of luck.
Thank you.
So a big thank you to Edmond Laplante, New Hampshire Constitution Party, US Senate candidate. Very excited to see what happens with the general election. They need a few percentage points, and then it gives them a lot of legitimacy going forward in the for the state races and the federal races here in New Hampshire. So excited to see the Constitution Party in New Hampshire possibly be able to build this movement up. They've been in the state they've had their third annual meeting this past year, which I attended, reporting on that at NewEnglandTake.com. A big thank you to the local papers that also picked up my reporting on it in their opinion section. It's really interesting to see a grassroots movement like this, and especially one that I agree with their politics, because that's been difficult for me in New Hampshire with that. So to have a party I agree with really grow up from the bottom up is fantastic. All right. So articles in the description down below if you're on YouTube, podcast service and stuff, you want to learn more about the Constitution Party. But I wanted to move on next to it was a podcast. So the Diary of a CEO is this like viral podcast. This British guy runs it. I don't know anything about him. All I know is his face shows up every 2 seconds on my Instagram Reels and my YouTube Shorts feed all the time. And he gets some interesting guests. So it's Diary of a CEO, and which all the people I hear about it are like commentators and stuff. So that's interesting. I guess CEO means a lot of different things. But this episode was especially interesting. It featured Konstantin Kisin, who I agree with for the most part. I agree with him 100% by any means when it comes to policies. But I have a lot of respect for him. His family immigrated from Russia back in the day, and he's basically was raised in England, and a center-right guy for sure. Him and Francis forgetting his last name, host Trigonometry, which is a very famous podcast. They get a lot of traction in the podcast space, the YouTube space, fairly well respected, I'd say, by more heterodox thinkers. And so Konstantin was on Diary of a CEO podcast facing Steve Keen. So he's a professor, he's an Australian economist and author. He's considered the leader in heterodox economics, which is very interesting when you consider the things he's going to bring up in this clip I'm going to show. If heterodox means leftist, the sky is falling, politics and economics, that's 100% what he talks about in this. I highly suggest you check out the full podcast because it is a very interesting conversation. And to me, why it's important is it's entirely a mask off of how those that catastrophize climate change and what they honestly want to have happen. Because there's always this constant, they always just revert back to, so anyone on the left that's afraid that climate change is going to be ending society as we know it and humankind and everything, they genuinely believe it. And either they believe that we need socialism to fix it, where everyone all just throws aside the free market and we have some form of one world government, or also the other thing is that just the world's going to end, we can't do anything about it. And he has a very interesting take where he outright says it. Because usually the argument gets turned around to say, oh, you just don't believe in climate change. You don't think the climate's changing, things of that nature. They say you're just some MAGA supporter that doesn't believe in the science and things like that. I know climate change is happening. This is climate change. Climate changes all the time. It's a matter of how extreme it's going to be and whether we can do anything about it, which is brought up in this clip too. Once again, definitely watch the full episode. It's long. It's like an hour and a half at least. But if you're interested in this debate, I highly suggest you watch it. But let's go to this clip. I just so happened to find it on Instagram, and we're just going to pull that from my You see all the random saved political clips I have here, but let's throw it to this.
Steve, when you say we need to reduce energy, do you mean the UK?
I mean the species. I mean human species.
So how does Andy Burnham do that?
We are not set
Andy Burnham is the new Prime Minister in England.
up to deal with this problem because we're broken into nation states. We can't make decisions that affect
So we need
the
world
entire
government to reduce world energy consumption.
We're going to be
right?
stuck with that, yes. We're going to be stuck with it.
Well, see, I'm glad we're having this conversation because at least this is the first time, and I mean this in a genuinely respectful way.
Yeah.
It's the first time I've ever heard anyone be honest about this issue.
Yeah.
That's what you want. You want world
No, I
government.
don't want it.
You believe
I'm
it's
saying
inevitable.
It's inevitable.
It's
because
inevitable.
by
You believe
ignoring this problem,
I
we've
get
got
it.
to the scale.
You believe
which
it's
the
inevitable
existential threat
that
to our
we have
species.
a world government
Yeah.
that reduces world energy consumption and therefore the prosperity of everyone
And
living
if we
on
had
the planet.
taken the advice of the limits to growth 50 years ago, we would not be having this conversation.
Good.
So what's genuinely interesting here is this guy's allegedly an economist. That's terrifying to me. It's terrifying to me that there are economists out there that are, instead of looking at legitimate numbers, and they just go to the most extreme numbers. So he does in another section of the episode go into the real what time frame it's going to be. He thinks literally the world's going to end in 10 years, which is bananas. It's totally bananas. The worst case, there are people that say like in 60 years we're going to be dealing with like catastrophic outcomes from it, which honestly to me is the most extreme level of doomerism or the thinking the world's going to end, because humans are very dynamic. They have the ability to think outside the box, come up with solutions. I mean, look at the craziness they've done over in the United Arab Emirates, where they're literally building islands in the desert using the little bit of water that's coming from the ocean and things of that nature. But let's continue with this.
We have delayed for half a century.
Is there any solutions that you believe are actually possible?
No.
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 There we go. You've done a public service here because you have showed what it is that sits underneath all the conversation about climate. It's a best case scenario, people who know there's nothing we can do, but what we should do is flail about in the meantime, and in order to not address this issue, impoverish, not just in this case, our citizens and our fellow people, but actually the entire world. That's what this is. And the entire challenge I have to this is I don't believe in suicide for token gestures towards not solving a problem you're claiming to solve. Right? We are not going to solve this problem by creating a world government and reducing energy consumption. That is never, ever in a billion years.
No, what we're going to do
happen.
instead is run into the crisis and fall apart
What
as
we're
a
going to do
civilization
instead,
in the process.
What we're going to do instead, and look, there's a possibility you're correct about that, but the only choice we actually have to solve this problem is to create forms of energy that do not produce CO2 but produce GDP. Clean energy. That's what we're going to have to do. By the way, it's what we've done throughout history.
And we need to make that clean energy more favorable in terms of the economics to India and China.
Did you need a world government to reduce usage of the horse and car and replace it with the automobile?
Fascinating. And Konstantin does a fantastic job countering the argument. How on earth do you think you're going to get a one world government where right now, when you look at the situation, we have the United States versus Russia, which has been a thing for almost 100 years now, maybe 80 years, ever since the Cold War began. You look at the conflict that we have with China. You look at the complex nature of economics between the United States and India. You look at how even the Western nations, when you look at the European nations versus each other, where you have Great Britain leaving the European Union with the United States and all of them not seeing eye to eye on things. When you just look south of the border to Mexico, these are not compatible. It's cultural, there's government, there's just people that, nationalism's a thing. Nationalism is very important, ultimately. You look at religion. You look at the whole conflict of the Middle East that's been going on since thousands of years. I do not understand how Professor Keene thinks there's any possibility of this thing he doesn't want, but has to happen, but it's already too late, but we should do it anyways in order to combat the thing that it doesn't solve. I think I followed the thread. It doesn't make any sense. It's a matter of we are going to destroy every society on the planet in order for you to have your one authoritarian government of central planning, which is communism. I mean, there's no way around it. That's how you do it. You do it through authoritarianism and ultimate collectivism, which is communism. That's where the CUMM at the beginning. It's everyone is coming together against their will under one regime that's going to use the science, allegedly, to determine how our government, our world functions going forward. Which A, isn't possible, B, doesn't fix anything, as he says himself, and C, he says he doesn't want, but I don't really take him at his word on that. I sincerely believe he wants it, judging by the fact he's refusing to come up with any other solution, because Konstantin does a great job saying, like, how has the West managed to succeed where other nations have not? Part of it's definitely resources. Part of it's definitely societies that have had a 1,000-year head start when it came to how we view modern societies and governments and things of that nature. The West definitely does have that advantage. But when you just look over the border between the United States and Mexico, like these are two nations that were started roughly around the same time, and it's night and day. Partly it's the nature of maybe the Spanish and the tribes versus the British and the native tribes, things of that nature. But it doesn't do what you want to do. It always comes down to the free market always wins. The fall of communism is because it didn't make sense. When you look at what tremendous authoritarianism had to happen to keep the communist system in place was terrible. It was putting people in labor camps. It was outright assassinations, and anyone who disagreed with it had to be removed, because if you don't have everyone going in the same direction, the system of government doesn't work. And when you look at the nature of how they ended up coming up with their pricing for products, too, because they did have money in the USSR, it came down to comparisons to what the free markets in the Western countries were utilizing. It was using, I can't remember if it was like a Sears Roebuck catalog or something like that, but they were using guides of free markets in order to figure out how to make their terrible government work. Communism is not going to make the climate better. It's going to make it worse. And when you look at how, and this is brought up also in the full podcast, where China is beginning to make the transition to cleaner fuel because it is more economical. It's more economical to have nuclear power plants and wind and things like that because you're not reliant on the chaos of the Middle East and what we're dealing with Iran. Because ultimately, in my opinion, part of the reason why we went, and Ryan Macbeth is a military analyst that it brings this up extensively. Part of the reason why we needed to get Iran off the chessboard was because they're one of the primary fossil fuel suppliers to China. It's same with Venezuela. It's the same thing. This is us taking some pieces off the board so that down the road, if or when things get really messy with China, we're going to be going in the right direction. China even sees it with their supposed communist government. I think Konstantin takes China's corrupt, semi-free market a little too far. I think they're more of a corrupt free market with central planning as opposed to full communism. But also that's ignored in there. So Kisin is a huge fan. He already says in there multiple times he's a fan of China and its government, which is terrifying to me. And thinks, hey, everyone can leave when they want to leave. You can't just leave. Look at what happened to the Uyghurs. Something I wish was brought up in that episode to counter what Steve Keen was bringing up is the Uyghur population that was literally ethnically cleansed from where they lived to another part and then put into forced labor camps or in villages out of the way, a la Soviet Russia. They used to do the same thing too. It's terrifying to think that he thinks China is our role model. It is not. There's a reason why the most successful nations in the world do not mimic China. China's trying to fast track to become what Western nations are and have the power behind it, which is totally understandable. When you look at India, India is the problem. We got to fix up India's energy situation for sure, because it is not clean energy. And a majority of the Western nations have been declining in their fossil fuel usage. We're doing everything we can. Every chance we get where it's economically viable to have a cleaner energy, we are working towards that. So the reason why I constantly say we need more nuclear energy is because it's the cleanest, least expensive, once active, to continue to have energy that just relies on our own resources here. A majority of the resources can be harvested or mined in the United States of America or friendly nations, as opposed to having to deal with the Middle East, Russia, down in South America, things like that for oil. These are all very complex nations with very messy governments that we need to not rely on. What that means for them in the long run, we're going to need to figure that out. But we need to be very isolationist when it comes to energy. We need to figure out what we want to do. And central planning is not the solution. Now, here's something else that I really wish Konstantin brought up in this debate also is COVID. It's the same thing. I was watching... there's so many things. Vinay Prasad's been putting out a bunch of things. Recently, he's been doing a bunch of interviews now that he's off the hook from his federal government job at the FDA, bringing up the failures of Fauci during COVID. That's because our nation abandoned public policy or abandoned our formation of our government for public policy from authoritarian-leaning individuals that said, it doesn't matter what the Constitution says. We need to do this to save apparently every single life, which is impossible. It's impossible when you have a pandemic. It's impossible even every flu season to not have some people pass away due to the disease. That's just the way it is, because old people are old and they're going to be susceptible to disease. It could be that just bad luck. It's just a matter of the numbers, especially as Vinay Prasad brings up too, he is a doctor, a medical doctor, is any vaccination has a risk inherently. So if you're saying it's not appropriate for there to be one death from a disease, but you blow off the fact that your vaccine also has an inherent risk, you're not thinking public policy. You're just thinking about what you personally want to have happen. And that's not how public policy works. Public policy is all about population level, finding the best path forward that's going to cause the least amount of death, destruction, economic impact in a negative way, things of that nature. Public policy cannot be, we need to stop the absolute worst case scenario from happening by any means necessary. That's just how it works. If we do that, that's literally authoritarianism, because you're removing our legislative branch of government, the first branch of government in our Constitution, and saying it doesn't matter what they think. We need to resort to the second article, which is the executive branch, and have them determine everything from HHS, USDA, all these various these executive branches. I am very happy that we had our changes with the federal makeup of the federal government in so many ways since Trump's second administration started, because it's removing the Chevron deference is the term for it. It was struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court, because we should be relying on the legislative branch to set the policy going forward, as opposed to just expecting these lone actors that aren't necessarily even in office for more than 1 to 4 years, depending on their gig that they have under whatever commissioner they're under the president. It's not good, it's bad policy, and it's useless. We should not be doing that. All right, that's it for this week. NewEnglandTake.com if you want more from the show. Thank you for dealing with my rant. I watched the whole interview with Konstantin from Diary CEO yesterday, and it was just my brain just was wanting to explode listening to Steve Keen talk. So I had to get it out. So I'll put a link in the description if you want to watch the full episode. Big thank you to WKXL for picking up the show every Saturday, 8:30 a.m. Next up over there is Facing the Future by the Concord Coalition. Thanks to the Granite Grok for picking up the show every Friday night. And Concord TV, AJ at NewEnglandTake.com. If you disagree with me, got any opinions, everything of that nature, please reach out. Talk to you soon.